Hey, welcome to the investor.bet AFL Round 16 betting trends preview. Here we're going to look at all 7 games coming up this weekend in the AFL. We're going to look at the matchup, look at the betting odds, and I'm going to go through how I'm approaching betting on these games, whether who I'm going to take to win, how much I think they're going to win by, whether I think it's going to go over or under the total, disposal markets, all that kind of thing, all backed by historical trends and statistics. That's how I bet every week, every year on the AFL and how I've done it for over 10 years. Before we get into this weekend's games though, I'm going to quickly look back at round number 15. There were 7 games last week, there's 7 again this week as we go through this little period where majority teams get their second bye of the season. The round started on Thursday night with Fremantle beating Essendon by 41 points at home. Then we had 3 upsets in a row. Brisbane beating Geelong by 41 points, North Melbourne beating Carlton by 11, and the Sydney Swans beating Port Adelaide by 19. From that point forward, the final 3 games are all won by favourites. Collingwood beating St Kilda by 34. GWS coming back to beat the Gold Coast Suns and win by 7. And then a dominant win by the Bulldogs over Richmond by 79 points. Home teams, every game this weekend were favourite. And the favourites won 4 of the 7 games with those 3 underdogs, Brisbane, North and Sydney, being the outright winners. Every team who won the game also covered the spread, so that means home teams covered in 4 of the 7 games. And from a total points perspective, 4 games went over the total, 3 games went under the total. Now, looking ahead to round number 16, if you want to look at more detailed breakdowns of the betting history, who's covering, are their games going over or under the total, all that information is in the AFL Bet Finders, which you can access through the link in the description. That's where you can also break down teams, if they're at home, away games, as a favorite underdog, are they covering, are they going over or under in that situation, so you can have those records all season long and for previous years, plus margin markets, are they winning by 1 to 39, are they winning by 40 plus more often, all broken down by different situations. Definitely check that out and use it to your advantage to win your bets on the AFL. The first game on round 16 is on Thursday night, Port Adelaide versus Carlton. Port Adelaide are favourites at home, $1.68. They're 6.5 point favourites, and the total is 164.5. Carlton have won 3 of the past 4 versus Port Adelaide, but Port Adelaide has won the most recent meeting. That was in round 20 last season at Marvel Stadium, winning 79-65. They met in round 12 last year at the Adelaide Oval, and Port Adelaide were $1.60 favourites in that game. Very similar to what they are here, and Carlton won 107-71. Going into that last meeting in round 20 last season, Carlton had previously scored 94 plus in each of the 3 previous meetings against Port Adelaide. They scored 107, 122 and 94 going back to 2022. But last time they met, Carlton were dominating this game early on, the one that Port Adelaide won. They had a 30-point lead just before halftime. But Port Adelaide kicked 8 of the final 9 goals of the game, including the last 6 goals to end up winning by 14 points. Carlton only kicked 1 goal and 5 behinds total for the second half, and that was really their downfall. So it was a game where they could have gone on to kick around that 90 to 100 point range, but just couldn't get it done in the second half. Port Adelaide dominated the inside 50s. They were plus 11, and they were also plus 10 at the clearances, and that's ultimately what won them the game. The underdog won both meetings last season, so that effectively sets up nicely here for Carlton. But Port Adelaide have won 4 of the past 5 versus Carlton at the Adelaide Oval. And the important fact about that is if you just isolate the Adelaide Oval meetings that Port Adelaide have won, they have won 3 of those 4 by at least 90 points. But you've got to go back, obviously, a few years to get to those games. So it's not super recent form when you're looking at those matchups. Leading into this game, Port Adelaide are off a loss against the Sydney Swans at home last week, losing by 19 points, being kept to 52 points. Over their past 5 games, they've only scored over 66 on one occasion, which is when they got 93 against Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. This will be their 3rd straight game at the Adelaide Oval. They've been a big underside recently, 6 of their last 7 games going under the total, and Carlton have been a big underside all season long. Their last 3 games have gone under the total, and 12 of 14 this season have gone under. They're also coming off a loss at the MCG against North Melbourne, losing that game by 11 points. They won 2 games prior. Important game for them to win here, and ultimately an important game for both of these teams. considering where they're currently placed on the ladder. Both of them very difficult to trust, and I think this is a game where it's going to be separated by a small margin. I really can't see either team winning by more than 3 goals, to be honest. So I'd be looking at potential try bets as the bet here. I think Port Adelaide at $1.68 is a little bit sure to be taking a side that is that difficult to trust, but Carlton obviously have issues as well, and there is pressure. There's probably a lot more pressure on Carlton, to be fair, considering they lost to North Melbourne last week. I think they'll come into this game bit more fired up. Port Adelaide, though, have an advantage, this being their 3rd straight game at home. So they've had no travel in recent times. The total is 164.5. I make a fair total for this game, 156.5, based off the statistics. Both these teams, as I mentioned, heavily favouring the unders this season. The history between the two teams, though, favours the overs, with 5 of the past 6 head-to-head going over. Personally, lean towards the under, though. A lot of those games that went over the total were because one of these teams racking up a high score well into the hundreds, and neither of them are doing it this season. Carlton haven't scored over 100 points since round 6 against North Melbourne, and for Port Adelaide, they haven't scored over 100 points, and they've only done it on 2 occasions all season, but since round 5 against Hawthorn, where they got 121 points. And as I said, in recent times, they're really struggling to score. So I think we'll see a fairly close and fairly low-scoring game to get round 16 underway. Sydney versus the Western Bulldogs. The Bulldogs are favourites on the road, $1.58, minus 9.5, and the total is 172.5. Sydney have a good recent record against the Bulldogs, winning 3 of the past 4, but the Bulldogs have covered 2 of the past 3, and they won the most recent meeting at the SCG last season in round 20, 87 points to 48, as $2.40 underdogs. The Bulldogs led that game wide. They had 27 scoring shots to 14. They were plus 14 inside 50s, plus 11 stoppage clearances, and Sydney had 82 turnovers in that game. So that last meeting was a dominant performance by the Bulldogs. They come into this off a big win against Richmond last week, winning that game by 72 points. The Western Bulldogs, 4 of their past 5 wins this season have all been by at least 71 points. So they're either losing or they're absolutely blowing teams out of the water. They've won and covered 5 of their last 8, and 7 of their last 10 games have gone over the total. Then for the Sydney Swans, they come off an important win against Port Adelaide. They've won 2 in a row now. They've covered the spread in both of those. Potentially starting to turn the season around a little bit too late, though. Their last 7 games, 6 of them have gone under the total. So alternating trends there on the total. 8 of the past 9 encounters between Sydney and the Western Bulldogs have been decided by 1 to 39 points. Statistically, though, there's a big difference in the attacking numbers of these sides. Bulldogs are the number 1 attacking side in the competition. They generate the most shots on goal. They're the most accurate side as well, whereas Sydney ranked 14th in points for and 16th in goal accuracy. Then when you add to that, the Western Bulldogs are the stronger defensive side. If they just play up to their averages, they'll get the win here. An important game for them as well. They're currently on that fringe of the top 8 and can't really afford to drop it. Interesting with the handicap for this game, minus 9.5. One thing I wanted to point out, Sydney, they've covered the spread in all 6 wins and have failed to cover in their last 5 losses. So when they're winning, they're covering the spread as well, but when they're losing, they're not even covering the spread. So it's one extreme or the other. So I'll be leaning towards the Bulldogs to win this game and probably win it comfortably. I think they just have too much scoring firepower, and there's just too much work for Sydney to do to turn around the current form and the historical form from the most recent matchup last season. The total for this game at 172.5, I think is a little bit low, but it will largely depend on the Western Bulldogs scoring as to whether it goes over. I don't think Sydney have enough scoring firepower to send this game over the total. They've been kept to 80 points or less in each of their last 6 games. Their past 2 games have been good defensively. They've only conceded a total of 88 points across 2 games, but they've been playing 2 of the worst attacking teams in Port Adelaide and Richmond. They're ranked 15th and 18th in points for going into those games, and now they're going against the number 1 attacking side. A few weeks ago, they played Adelaide, who ranked 3rd in points for going into that game. That was at the SCG as well, and Adelaide scored 131 points on them. And if you go back a little bit earlier on in the season, in round number 7, they played Gold Coast. Gold Coast were averaging the most points of any team going into that game, and they scored 117 against Sydney. So with the total, it'll come down to the Bulldogs scoring. I prefer to play their team total. If you're going to play an over in this game, I'd take the Bulldogs team total because they're going to be the ones that vastly contribute to it. And I think Sydney will hover around what their team total is set at. So looking at the total that way, historically, like you've got alternating trends here. Sydney favouring unders, Bulldogs favouring overs. The matchup historically favours unders. So you'd either have to play unders or Bulldogs team total to go. Gold Coast versus Melbourne. The Suns are $1.38 favourites, minus 17.5. Coming into this with 3 straight losses and non-covers. And the total is 172.5. Earlier this season, in round 3 at the MCG, Gold Coast broke a 12-game winning streak that Melbourne had against them. Now they've won 1 of the last 13 against the Demons. Gold Coast started $1.75 favourites for that game and won by 58 points. They kicked the first goal and led for the rest of the game. There was an early behind by Melbourne. That was the only time they led throughout the game. There was only 38-21 in favour of Gold Coast at halftime, so a low-scoring first half, but the Suns kicked 13 goals to 6 in the second half to win by 58 points. Gold Coast were plus 25 inside 50s, plus 16 clearances. They're also a lot more accurate in that game. They kicked 18 goals, 12 behinds, compared to Melbourne kicking 8 goals, 14 behinds. Gold Coast have also covered 3 of the past 4 versus Melbourne. They're back at home here, but they haven't really had that many games on the Gold Coast this season. This will be their 4th game there. They have a 3-1 record. The only loss against Fremantle in the rain a few weeks ago in round 12, 75-64. I think they'll be too good for Melbourne here, who come into this game off the bye. But prior to that, lost against Port Adelaide. They've also lost 3 in a row leading in. Interesting in terms of the margins. Gold Coast, all 5 losses for them this season have been by 24 points or less, whereas in Melbourne, 7 of their last 8 losses this season have been by 25 points or more. So Melbourne have been blown out a few more times. So I like Gold Coast to win this game. I think they're the stronger overall team. They're the better attack and better defense. Melbourne's numbers, whilst they have improved as the season's progressed, I think they've dropped away a little bit. They went through that patch where they won 5 or 6 games and had got their attack going a lot more, but it's dropped off a little bit lately. They've been kept to 71 or less in each of their last 3 games and have played Port Adelaide and St Kilda during that time. They've also started to consistently concede around this mid-80s to 90s mark. And Gold Coast, they're still ranked 4th in attack. They should be able to find enough points at home to beat this Melbourne. I don't think it's going to be around that 10-goal margin that was earlier in the year, but I think we'll still see a 4 to 5 goal win by the Suns if they play up to their best. Now, for the total at 172.5, the past 4 between these two sides have gone over. This season, Gold Coast have started to favour the under. 3 of their last 4 have gone under. Melbourne, 2 of their last 3 have gone under. I make a fair total for this game, 169.5, so I think the total is slightly high. But if it is good conditions on the Gold Coast on Saturday, then I think they'll go very close. I don't think the final score for this game is going to be too far off this total. So you could look at alternate lines. That's probably the best way to play it, with a slight lean to the over. I think Gold Coast have enough points in them to push this game right towards this number and going over. Then down in Tasmania, we have Hawthorn as big favourites against North Melbourne. They're minus 31.5, $1.17 on the money line, and the total is 157.5. Hawthorn have won and covered the past 6 versus North Melbourne, and they've won the past 4 games, each by at least 45 points. Last season, down in Tasmania in round 24, Hawthorn were $1.03 favourites and won 170-46, so a 124-point win to Hawthorn in that game. They led at all 4 quarters and won all 4 quarters. If you looked at them individually, they had 40-11 scoring shots for the game. They scored 10 goals to 1 in the last term, which really pushed out the margin. Hawthorn were plus 21 inside 50s. North Melbourne only had the 11 scoring shots from 40 entries, so only a 25-ish% efficiency rate in terms of just scoring shots when going inside 50, and that's not even goals. Like, ideally you want to be at least that number for goals per inside 50 at a bare minimum. Hawks had plus 24 clearances in that game. So as the scoreline suggests, it was a very dominant performance. Hawthorn come into this off the bye. Prior to that, they beat the Crows down in Tasmania by 3 points. They're back down there again this week, so that recent experience. Both these teams play plenty of games down there, so it's not as unfamiliar like for North Melbourne or Hawthorn as it would be if either team were versing majority of the other teams in the competition. Hawks have won 2 straight. This is an important game for them. They have a fairly tricky schedule in the run home. Games against Collingwood, Adelaide, Brisbane still to come. So I think they'll want to make sure they put North Melbourne away, and I'll be surprised if they don't. North Melbourne coming off a confidence-boosting win against Carlton. They nearly gave the game away late. They had a big margin at 3/4 time, but were kept scoreless in the 4th quarter, but had enough of a break to hold on and win that game by 11 points in the end. They have won 3 of their past 5 games and also covered the last 3 straight and covered 6 of their last 8. Their last 3 wins, going back to round 10 against Richmond, have all been by 11 or less. So when they're winning, they're just getting over the line by a small margin. 3 of their last 4 losses and the draw against the Brisbane Lions have all been by 9 points or less. So they've been a lot better recently. We haven't seen as many, well, there was one against Collingwood, but as many of the 30, 40 plus defeats that we saw during the first month and a half of the season. But at home, Hawthorn should be far too good here. I think just the importance as we roll towards finals, Hawthorn will take it up a notch. The history between the two sides against each other heavily favours Hawthorn as well. I think with laying 31.5 points is a little bit of a stretch, because it will come down to how well Hawthorn come through the bye. And if they come out absolutely firing off the bye earlier this season, they played Port Adelaide in Adelaide and were really hit hard early and were out of that game realistically by quarter time. Made a little bit run back to lose by 30 in the end and made the margin more respectable, but they were never really in that game. So that concerns me a little bit, but I think they'll be too good. They'll win the game. Potentially look at some alternate markets as well. The total is 157.5. The past 2 between the sides have gone over, but currently Hawthorn, their last 4 games have gone under the total, and 6 of their past 7 have gone under, and North Melbourne, their last 7 games have gone under. So right now, how these teams are playing is heavily favouring the under. We've got a 14-point lower total for this game than we saw earlier on in the season. We have a 14-point lower total points line than we saw in the round 24 match at this venue last season. However, that game was played during the day. I think it was 12:30 first bounce, where this game being the 4:30 or 4:15 first bounce. It's a twilight game, and that's why the total is a couple of goals lower than it was last time. I think we'll see around the 150, 160 points. I think this is pretty spot on considering the conditions. The last game down in Tasmania between Hawthorn and Adelaide was ultra low scoring. That was played at night. I think it'll be like both teams will need to be very accurate in order to get this game to go over. But I like Hawthorn to win this game and win it fairly comfortably. I think they just have too much attacking power, and defensively they have been really good recently. Their defensive numbers are still really strong. North Melbourne, think they'll struggle to make it back-to-back wins like they have done every other time this season. Another big favourite, the later game on Saturday, Collingwood $1.03 at Marvel Stadium, minus 58.5 against West Coast. The total is 172.5. Collingwood have won and covered 4 of the past 6 versus West Coast, and they've also won the past 2 by 66 and 63 points. The reason I mention that is because the handicap is 58.5 for this game. So the last 2 times Collingwood would have covered it. Last season they met at this venue in round 9. Collingwood were 38.5 point favourites, so 20 point additional handicap this time around. Obviously, due to the fact that these teams are trending in absolute opposite directions. Collingwood have won 6 straight and won 12 of their last 13. West Coast have lost 4 straight and only have the 1 win on the season, and we're up to round number 16. Collingwood, in that game last season, had it won at halftime. They were leading 74 points to 19. They had 19 to 4 scoring shots. And with that game virtually being over at halftime, there were only 47 points scored in the second half. Collingwood won the second half 29 to 18. They had plus 25 inside 50s. West Coast only had 34 inside 50s total for the game. Stoppage clearances though were even. Collingwood were plus 10 at the centre clearances. So pretty dominant overall performance. Stoppages probably the only real area where this game was even. Everything else heavily favouring Collingwood. They have covered 8 of the last 11, whereas West Coast have failed to cover 3 of the last 4. Generally, in the AFL, I don't love taking big handicaps and trying to lay so many points, as Collingwood haven't won a game by more than 59 or more points since round 1 against Port Adelaide. Every other win that they've had during this run of 12 of 13 wins, so 11 of those 12 wins have all been by less than what this handicap is. But obviously, majority of them have been against better opposition than they face here. They did play North Melbourne, who were 17th on the ladder at Marvel back in round 11, so only about a month or so ago, and they won that game by 45 points. In terms of trying to back Collingwood to the handicap, I'd probably stay away from doing it, even though I think they'll probably win by around this margin. This is back-to-back games at Marvel Stadium for them. The ways you could potentially play this game is looking at Collingwood's scoring. They're currently ranked 5th in points for, but they're versing the side that concede the most points on average at 104 a game, who give up the most shots at goal, who give up the most inside 50s, and Collingwood are the team that generate the most scoring shots per inside 50, and West Coast obviously concede the most scoring shots per inside 50. So it sets up really well for Collingwood to put up a good score here. So that is the way that it potentially could cover this number. And West Coast, their last 8 losses, only one of them has been by more than 59 points. So majority of those losses all around the 30 to 40 range, and they're a couple up into the 50s. And then their biggest loss during this period was against Adelaide, where they lost 128 to 62. The issue with this game, when you look at how the teams match up, is Collingwood are the number 5th attacking side facing the worst defense, and Collingwood are also the number 1 defensive side, and West Coast ranks second last in attack. So these teams are at polar opposite ends of numbers, so you can understand why the handicap is 10 goals. Don't really want to lay that many points for Collingwood, even though I think they'll win very comfortably. For this game, I think it's a good opportunity for Collingwood to get their attack sorted and really firing going towards the end of the season. Their defense seems really strong, but if they can get their attack going, so I think there'll be a little bit of an extra focus on that for them this game. They're not going to have any issue keeping West Coast to a low enough score to beat them. West Coast generally score at least 50 points every game, and likely will score somewhere in that 50 to 65 range. Can't really see them getting more than that. But I think Collingwood, if they just put a bit of extra focus on their attack here, then we'll see a bit of a high scoring game and potentially a good way to bet on this. I think looking at the total at 172.5, it is a few points higher than I think a fair total should be for this game, particularly when Collingwood, 4 of their last 5 have gone under, and West Coast, their last 2 games have gone under, and then you also have 3 of the last 4 between them going under, and the last 4 head-to-head at Marvel all going under. I did expect this number to be in the 160s, the mid to high 160s, but even at this number, I would be leaning towards the over. I think West Coast can get 50 to 65 points. They should at least get the 50, and then Collingwood, they should score over 100 fairly comfortably in this game. And when you look at it, if we're looking at West Coast are definitely scoring 50 points, then if you're taking Collingwood to win by 60 or more, then they're going to need to score at least 110. So potentially looking at Collingwood's team total, and if that number is around the 110 or just over mark, is potentially a good play, or also still the full game over, because instead of taking Collingwood at the handicap, you could take that. You could also play alternate lines, Collingwood at a shorter line and the total slightly lower. I think those are all really good options of how to play this game. The other thing as well is there's obviously prolific ball winners for Collingwood. West Coast give up the 2nd most opposition disposals of any team, the 3rd most uncontested possessions, and the 2nd most contested possessions. Sets up well for certain Collingwood players to get high numbers, so I'll be looking at those markets as well when I preview these games in the best bets. Then on Sunday we have Richmond versus Adelaide, another game with a big favourite. Adelaide are $1.14 minus 34.5, and the total is 174.5. Richmond have won and covered 4 of the past 5 versus Adelaide. They won the game last season in round 13 at the Adelaide Oval, 79 to 71. This matchup has a history of being fairly close. The past 4 have all been decided by between 8 and 32 points. That matchup last season, Richmond kicked the first 3 goals and led by 6 at quarter time. Adelaide then won the second quarter and had generated a lead at halftime just by the 1 point margin. Then early in the third quarter, Adelaide got the first goal, and then Richmond went on a run, kicking 5 straight really quickly. Whilst Adelaide fought back and kicked 4 of the final 6 goals, Richmond were able to hang on, even though they had 2 less scoring shots in that game, 21-19 in favour of Adelaide. Richmond were +6 inside 50s. Adelaide had 10 more free kicks than the Tigers. Richmond +5 clearances. And also Richmond, good pressure with 13-3 tackles inside 50. I think that definitely made a difference in that game. Richmond come into this game losing 5 straight. Last week against Western Bulldogs on Sunday, they had their second biggest loss of the season. Their only biggest was back in round 3 against St Kilda, where they lost by 82 points. This was an equal second season high, most points conceded. It's hard to really see them winning this game against a Crow side who are off the bye as well. Only lost by 3 points to Hawthorn. Had won 3 straight prior to that against Brisbane, Sydney and West Coast. Adelaide have covered 4 of their last 5 games. I think they'll be far too strong here for Richmond. You've got one of the best attacking sides in Adelaide, who ranked 3rd in points for, going up against the lowest scoring side in the team. Also, Adelaide ranked 2nd in points conceded, where Richmond ranked 17th. Now, as much as Richmond have hung around in games this season and kept teams to small winning margins, I think that's going to fall away towards the end of the season. We've already started to see it drop away a little bit, like losing by 79 against the Western Bulldogs, and prior to their bye, losing by 44 against Sydney. It was just that little patch where they only lost by 3 against GWS and 4 against North Melbourne. But against good teams, just don't think they have the ability to keep up. The game at home helps them a little bit, but the most likely outcome here is Adelaide win this game by 40 plus. I think the history between the two teams and the fact that last time they met, Adelaide were minus 26.5 at home and Richmond won that game. Then when you add in the form from this season, that history is the only thing keeping this handicap under 40 points. So I like Adelaide to win this game fairly comfortably. There's just too much of a difference between the two sides. The total at 174.5. Richmond had, going into the game with Western Bulldogs, 9 straight games go under. That was the first one since all the way back in round number 4 against Brisbane, since they'd had an over, but that game went over. But it wasn't due to them scoring, it was due to the Bulldogs scoring 135 points. Richmond haven't scored. They've been kept to 58 or less in 3 of their last 4 games. For Adelaide, they've had 8 of their last 9 games go under the total after starting the season with 3 straight overs. So at 174.5, even though 3 of the past 4 head-to-head have gone over, I'm going to be leaning towards the under here. I think this number is just a little bit too high. Richmond don't have enough points in the midst. If this game is to go over, Adelaide's going to need to score at least 120 points, in my opinion. So prefer to back the unders and also take Adelaide to win comfortably. So that's how I'm looking at that game. And then you could also look at disposal markets for the Crows as well. Richmond give up the most opposition disposals per game and the most uncontested possessions. Adelaide give up the least in both of those categories, so Adelaide should also have plenty more of the ball. And the final game, Fremantle versus St Kilda. Fremantle, $1.30 favourites at home, minus 21.5. There's currently no total for this game, but we'll touch on that at the end once we go through the matchup. Fremantle have won 5 straight leading in. They've had 10 days rest after playing on the Thursday night last week at home against Essendon. They haven't had to leave Perth for now. It'll be 4 weeks in a row. So they had to bye. They're North at home, Essendon at home, and now St Kilda at home. So they're really well positioned here. I think they're going to be too strong for St Kilda, who since their bye have had losses against the Western Bulldogs and Collingwood. You'd probably consider this on par with the Bulldogs, maybe even slightly easier opposition with the form that the Bulldogs are in. But Fremantle in their own right are going really well. They normally do enough to win games. That's the thing you just got to be a little bit cautious of. But St Kilda, they've only won 2 of their last 10 games. Those wins against Fremantle and Melbourne, which I'm going to touch on. So earlier this season in round 8, St Kilda beat them 94-33 in Melbourne. Now they're playing over in Perth. In that game, it was really low scoring in the first half. Only 5 goals scored between the two teams. Total, St Kilda kicked 4 of the 5 goals and led by 20 points at halftime. Then there was 93 points scored in the second half. So 93 of the 127 points in that game, all coming in the second half. St Kilda kicked 10 goals to Fremantle's 4, had 24-8 scoring shots. St Kilda were plus 27 inside 50s. Fremantle only had 34 inside 50s in that game. Saints were plus 9 in free kicks. 50 to 22 in clearances, +8 at the centre, +20 at the stoppages, and also +48 contested possessions in favour of St Kilda. All those numbers will be very important for Fremantle to reverse in this game. And I think the way Fremantle play and how they're coached, they certainly wouldn't be impressed by that performance. Caleb Strong only had 15, Andrew Brocher only had 18 disposals each in that game as well. I think there'll be a lot of motivation for Fremantle to reverse the result from earlier in the season, and at home, I think they'll get the job done and make it 6 straight wins. St Kilda, all 8 of their losses from those last 10 games have been by at least 15 points, and they failed to cover in all the losses. So we think Fremantle's going to win. They're probably going to cover the spread as well based off of that. And the games where they've covered this season, and the reason why that's important is because they have been an underdog in 12 of 14 games so far. But Fremantle to win this game and get revenge from the matchup earlier on in the year. They haven't met over in Perth since round 2, 2022. And St Kilda won that game by 10 points. There wasn't much between them in the odds. But Fremantle to win, I think this will be that little bit too strong for St Kilda. And the total, there's currently no number for this game. I make a fair total, 166.5. So it'll be interesting to see what number goes up. 4 of the past 5 head-to-head have gone under. St Kilda, their last 2 since the bye have gone over. They've conceded 108 or more in both games. Fremantle, 4 of their last 5 games have gone under the total. They've been doing well at limiting opposition scoring. They haven't had an opponent score over 67 points against them in the last 5 games. Games against GWS, Port Adelaide, Gold Coast, North Melbourne, Essendon. Half of those teams in the bottom half of the ladder in points for, the other 2 in the top half. So a good balance. But at 166.5 with that number, we'll see what number goes up. If it goes up too much higher than that, I like the under. If it goes up a few points lower, then I lean towards the over, pending additional circumstances that I'll review later in the week. But that's how I'm looking at betting on the AFL this weekend. AFL this season is going really, really well. If you want to follow all my bets, that's in the link in the description. Thanks guys for watching. Good luck with your bets this weekend, and I'll see you in the next video.